Today I would like to talk about two of God's men. A tale of two of God's men. And the important lesson that we can learn by comparing the two. Job and David. Two approaches to God and what must be done about it in our own lives. David was known as a man after God's own heart. I believe it says this in 1 Samuel. And whenever any people of faith hear that, we all go, wow, I wish I was a man after God's own heart, or woman after God's own heart. Yes? It's a no-brainer. We all want to be a person after God's own heart. No questions asked, right? So here is the question. How did David get that way? How did he become a man after God's own heart? That is the question we are going to answer in this video, unequivocally. For you, the intelligent viewer, and for me, the messenger. Okay, here we go. We're going to start by looking at Job and why Job was not referred to as a man after God's own heart. And it's not a matter of character, it's not a matter of fault, it's not a matter of blame or guilt or shame. It's a matter of logistics. And how they were both raised and what they were both taught and learned, and consequently how they both lived and approached their Creator. So here we go. If we study the story of Job, we can see that, and I'm not a big follow along in your Bible kind of guy. I'm the kind of guy that, yes, we've all read the Bible, we know what it says. Let's talk about it and see what God can teach us from it. We're listening to the Spirit of truth all the time as we're listening to anybody, right? We're always listening to the Spirit of truth and what He can tell us about Jesus, about God, about the Father, about the Holy Spirit, about life, about everything, right? Jesus said that the Spirit of truth would guide us into all truth and teach us about all things, right? So, you, me, all of us, we're always listening to the Spirit of truth in all these videos. That's job number one. Okay, that out of the way. Job approached God like this. And perhaps you know some people who approach God like this. And I used to approach God like this. This is one of the ways that I understand. God must be appeased. We don't really know Him very well, but we've heard about Him. And we know we have to do a lot of things. In Job's case, sacrifices, praying for all his kids. How many times a day? I don't remember. It was a lot, right? All the sacrifices and all the things he did for his own children, much less himself, right? What does God say about him in the beginning? He was upright and blameless, more than anybody else in the land, right? We think this is a good thing, yes? It's sort of a good thing, okay? But it's not the best thing, which is one thing we have to learn in life, is that the good is always the enemy of the best. So being upright and blameless and fearing God more than anybody else in the whole land is not the best, folks. It's not. It's good. Definitely better than the alternative, but it's not the best, and we're going to get to what the best is. Okay? So, we can also tell from the story of Job that he had some fear in him, right? The thing that I greatly feared has come upon me. Okay? That's a clue. When we're living from fear in life, that's always a problem. Always a problem. Now, get the no-brainer out of the way, okay? There is a healthy fear of God that if you mess with him, he's going to kick your butt. We all know that, okay? But when you get beyond that, and the rest of us who live with God in relationship, sincerity, truth, trying to do our best with him, okay? That's who I'm talking to here. We cannot live in fear, unhealthy fear of him, because that just is the antithesis of, it is an antithetical component of relationship. Okay? Think about it with your wife, your parents, your kids, your friends. If you live in fear of them, there's not a whole lot of relationship there, okay? Again, the only justification is God the Father is the creator of all things. If you mess with him, you're going to get your butts kicked. I'm not going to say that again, okay? So, in healthy, loving relationships, which is the number one goal in the Bible all the way through, from day one, when they were in it, then they lost it. Day 2, when he comes and visits Moses on the mountain, and says, number one goal, love with your creator. All your heart, mind, soul, strength, and love others as yourself. Okay? And page 3, or day 3, to be consistent, the New Testament, when Jesus comes and fulfills that, the veil is torn, opening the way into the Holy of Holies for what? Relationship, where the prime number one commandment can now be fulfilled much easier, okay? But the same prime commandment remains the same throughout all of God's history. Love with him. It's all through the Bible, folks. That's the number one commandment and goal. Be in love with God. Now, David, he had that and he nailed that, okay? So let's talk about David for a minute. I'll probably make a couple other points about Job, but let's talk about David and contrast him, compare and contrast him with Job, all right? David, from his youth, was in love with God, with Jesus, right? Let's not get caught up in the technicalities. God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, right? They've always all been there. Even says in Corinthians, it was Christ that led him through the desert, right? So, okay. Your creator, David, lived in love with the guy from his youth, right? Probably due in large part to his father, Jesse, who taught him, hey, son, you got to live in love with God, right? Possibly. He got it from somewhere, okay? Don't know why the rest of his sons didn't get it. Maybe they did. We don't know much about them, okay? All we know is they didn't get to be king, and he did. So he must have got it more than they did. So David started out in love. And that love so defined the rest of his life. Throughout all of David's life, you study it, boy. 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, Kings. And you can even look at his writings in the Psalms. What is the one defining thing that defined his life? Love with God. It's all throughout everything we see with David. Everywhere he went, everything he did, before he was king, after he was king. Even when he screwed up, boy, and God gave him consequences, he said, I'd rather have your consequences than to be in the hands of man. That shows absolute trust and love. And I say to you that the one thing that David never doubted was God's love. And that's what made him a man after God's own heart. And where did he get that? He got that in relationship. That's the key, folks. Relationship with Jesus is the key that makes you a man after God's own heart. Relationship with Yahweh, Jehovah, the Creator, makes you a person after God's heart. Why? Because God's heart is love and relationship. How do I know? Look at story number 1. The very first story in the Bible. Where did he put the people? Where did he put Adam and Eve? He put them in a loving relationship with him. That's where he created them to live. That's like prime directive commandment number 1. That's what God always wanted, and that's what he still always wants. So, David lived there from his youth, and it so defined the rest of his life. Even when he screwed up and sinned badly, he said, I'll take your consequences because I trust you. You love God so much that when you screw up and you know you got consequences coming, you say, I'll take him from you because you trust him so much, right? Knowing that what? He's merciful. And in that story, God did back off a bit. So this is the difference between Job and David. Job did not know God. Okay? Some people will argue and say, well, yes, he did. God spoke so highly of him. No, let's look at what God said. God said Job was the most righteous man in the land. He feared God and he shunned evil more than anybody else. Okay? That's what he said. He never said that he loves me. Okay? And some will say, well, yes, if we love God, we'll keep his commandments. Yes. And that can be said that if you look at somebody who really knows God in a loving, close relationship, it's a no-brainer they keep his commandments. Okay? That's a different approach than the religious folks. Okay? Religion being working for God, trying to be good. Okay? Is that the essence of religion? Not in relationship. Okay? So if you look at, lost my point. What was my point? Okay, that was Job's approach. All right? Job was like, oh, what God said about him. Okay? God said he was righteous, he shunned evil, and he feared God. Okay? You can say, well, he feared God. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Yes, that's a start. But the ultimate commandment is love with God. Okay? So it didn't say that Job knew God. How do I know? Because at the end of the book, Job himself says, I heard of you with my ears, but now my eyes see you. Folks, Job went through a process of learning to be in love with God and learning to know him. There's a huge difference. And you can see it in this story. Yeah, Job was a really dang good guy. Okay? The best. Okay? But we're not called to be good guys. Being good guys is a result of living in love with God. Because when you're in love with him, you will do what he says, no problem, and no questions asked. Okay? So, Job had to learn to be in love with God. And I guarantee you that after he got to know him, Job's life was filled with the love of God from that day on. And I guarantee you he was so much happier in that love than he was in the fear. That's the difference, folks. David never lived in an unhealthy fear of his Creator, ever. How do we know? He said things that most of us are afraid to say. Because we think we're going to get punished, because our love has not been perfected yet, right? So Job had to go through a process to learn the love of God. Now, why is this important for you and for me and for our kids? Here's why it's important. In this life, well, there are many reasons it's important. Here's a big one, okay? As Jesus said, you're going to have trouble, okay? Jesus said, in the world you will have trouble. He wasn't discriminating. He didn't say whether you know me, whether you don't know me, whether you're a Christian, whether you're not a Christian. He was just stating the truth. In this world, you're going to have trouble, right? Right. So we know this, and Jesus knew this, okay? It's not really new news, okay? But here's an important point. Here's the very important point. What kind of trouble do you want to have? The kind of trouble that Job had was going through foundational learning processes in his own heart and mind and spirit and soul about who God was his relationship to him, and how to then relate to him from then on. And that, friends, defines our lives greatly. Okay? Hugely. How we think about God, our Creator, our Father, and who we think He is, and what we have to do as human beings to relate to Him, hugely affects our lives, consciously and subconsciously. So, the struggles that Job went through, regardless of the source, that's what God used them for. Okay? God took all those struggles that came from the enemy or came from wherever they came from, right? And He worked in Job's heart and mind and spirit and soul to get him, to teach him, Job, I love you and I want to be with you. I don't want you to do all these sacrifices, although I appreciate it, right? I don't want you to work so hard at being so good, and I don't want you to be afraid of me. We got that down on day one, Job. We understand that. We're so far beyond that. Now I need you to move on to love. I need you to be in love with me. That is at the heart of Job's struggle. And that struggle is foundational, right? All of us are going to go through that at some point if we need to. Some do, some don't, depending on how your relationship with God starts. When we're kids and growing up as adults, okay? Compare Job's struggles to David's struggles. What were David's struggles? David's struggles all centered around doing God's will in the earth. Which was what? At that time, it was establishing the kingdom of Israel. Right? Which the kingdom of Israel, its whole purpose was to be there and show God to the rest of the world and bring forth the Messiah for the whole planet. So David's struggles centered around that. David's struggles in life, while they were still troublesome, no doubt, as all troubles in this life are, that's why they're called troubles, right? They were on a higher level, or maybe not higher, but a different plane, a different level. Job's, I wouldn't say either more or less valuable. This one's actually more valuable, but you should get it sooner, right? So that you can spend your time here. So David's struggles were here, doing God's will on earth, right? He had to fight a bunch of battles. He had to deal with his own sin. He had to deal with treason and family betrayal, the whole 9 yards. I mean, read the whole story. It's all in there, boy. Right? Sexual temptation. It just goes on and on and on, right? Anger from his men, leadership issues, right? It's all in there. So many of those dynamics are in the story of David, okay? That's where David spent his time and energy because he was doing God's will for everybody else around him. He already had the relationship. He was already in love. That's what qualified him in the first place. That's what got everybody's attention because he walked up and saw Goliath and he was so full of the love of God that he didn't know fear from a hole in the ground. He said, "Are you guys crazy? I'm in love with God. I can kick this guy's butt." And he did. Because love makes you fearless, boy. Job was not fearless. David was fearless. And it's obvious from the entire story. David was entirely fearless throughout the entire story. Never once did he back down from a fight. Ever. But he trusted God. That trust and that love is what made him fearless. Okay? So, for application for our own lives, we can, for many different reasons, sometimes, a lot of times, not even our own fault. Spend our struggles in life, which we're all going to have struggles and troubles. Jesus was very clear about this. Figuring out these foundational things of being in love with your Creator, getting the love part down, which love secures us. Love gets rid of fear. Love makes us secure in life and able to do these things over here. But if we don't have that down, you can't do these things over here. Insecure, fearful people don't do really big, important things. I speak from experience, folks. This is not me preaching to you. This is me preaching to me because I've lived this. Okay? It's never me going, oh, you people need to straighten up. No. It's us learning from God. Okay? People who are secure in the love of God do great things, boy. And David proved that time and time again. And his followers proved that as it leaked off onto them. Okay? So, what kind of struggles do you want to have in life? Okay? So, 2 things to take away from this. Number 1, you, me, we must have a real, loving, authentic relationship with Jesus. We have to have it. Has to be real. Has to be more than reading the Bible. Has to be more than having a prayer time. Has to be more than going to church. Has to be more than Christian disciplines, folks. You have to know the guy personally, like David did, sitting down in the field singing and playing his harp. Probably had years and years and years and years of knowing Jesus himself, or God the Father, whoever it was, maybe both, right? Let's not split hairs, okay? We have to have that personally. And number 2, this one's near and dear to my heart. I say this with as much emphasis as I can possibly muster. What do you want for your kids? What kind of struggles do you want them to have in life? Do you want them to struggle with insecurity and fear and those struggles? Or do you want them to deal with the troubles of kicking butt for the Lord in life, which God knows we need a lot of these days? And I'm going to tell us, how to do that. You lead your children into a loving, authentic relationship with Jesus himself. A lot to learn from the lives of Job and David, isn't there? Love with Jesus. Love with God. You, me, and our children must know it.